Hello everyone. Welcome to What Do Movable-Type and XML Have in Common? My name is Sarah O'Keefe. I will be delivering this webinar. This one is a little bit different from some of the other webinars we've done. It's a little more conceptual and I hope thought-provoking for you, so I hope you enjoy it. We have a couple of things just to address some housekeeping issues. We will be taking questions at the end of the seminar. You can also use the Questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel to ask your questions there, and I will try to answer those throughout the session. I do also have contact information at the very end, so if you want to follow up with me, you certainly can. We are recording this webcast. If you are a participant on the live webcast, you are muted, and your information does not appear in the recording. You should also be aware that the Q&A session will not be part of the recording. So, what do Movable-Type and XML have in common? And the basic answer is this. They are both largely economic inventions or things that had a large economic impact. They did not necessarily make new items possible, so it was not a new invention in the sense that it made it possible to do something new. Prior to the invention of Movable-Type, it was possible to create books with woodblock printing and some other techniques. It was just that they were prohibitively expensive. So the printing press comes along and makes it possible to print in a reasonable manner in a way that is economically feasible. And I think what I'm going to be telling you throughout the session is that the same thing is very much true for XML. It does not necessarily enable you to do new things. For the most part, what it allows you to do is do what you're already able to do better and faster and possibly cheaper. In addition to being largely economic, Movable-Type and XML both have in common that they are highly disruptive. And they are disruptive in ways that may not become clear until much, much later in the process. In the case of Movable-Type, I'm going to talk a little bit about the most important impact of Movable-Type, which did not, in fact, come along until 150 years later. And we're only about 10 years into XML. So this question of what will this disruption do for us becomes interesting. So this is a lava flow, and I wanted to show you an example of what can happen in an unexpected manner when lava does solidify. This is called the Giant's Causeway. It's off the coast of Northern Ireland, and these hexagons that you see here, or these hexagonal cylinders, are in fact made of lava that crystallized in a certain particular pattern. So rather an unexpected thing to kind of see, and something that could have come out of that type of disruption. So let's step back and talk a little bit about content before Gutenberg came along in 1452 or thereabouts. Before Gutenberg, we had hand-copied manuscripts for the most part. There was some woodblock printing, but it was quite rare. Every copy of a document then was unique and usually commissioned for a specific buyer, which meant usually customized for that buyer. And we're talking about a years-long process to actually create a copy of a document. 10 years to make a copy of the Bible was not at all unusual. And some of the documents that were created, some of the books that were created were in fact some really great artistic achievements. It's also important to note that Gutenberg did not actually invent, or was not the first person to invent Movable-Type. This is an image of the Diamond Sutra, which was printed in approximately 868 in China. Now, the interesting question to me about the Diamond Sutra is this question of why didn't print lead to the same kind of revolution in China and India that it did in Western Europe? That's a complex question that I don't have a lot of good answers to, but I think part of it, a simple part of the answer, is that Western languages only require something like 200 glyphs, 200 different kinds of characters, whereas printing technology for China would require thousands of glyphs. So the barrier to literacy was still quite significant even if printing technology was available. Here we have an interior page from the Lindisfarne Gospel. This was handwritten, hand-illuminated, and another thing to note here is that you can just see there are some underlying images underneath what we're looking at here. The pages were so expensive to create that people would reuse them. So they would scrape off or erase whatever they had put on the page and then put a new layer onto the page. That is, in fact, called a palimpsest, and since that is the name of our blog, we have a particular interest in those. This is a page, a very famous page, actually, from the Book of Kells, which is now in Dublin at the Trinity Library. Again, we have hand-drawn art. To me, it's quite beautiful. And if you go in and you look at a detail of a page from the Book of Kells, you see these swirls and everything and those Celtic knots, which were done by hand, by a person, drawing on a sheet of paper, pretty much freehand. So here is a content page. You can again see that there is some information underneath there that's been scraped away, but you still see those spectacular colors and just some really interesting stuff going on there. It's also worth noting that somebody had very, very nice handwriting, because all of those letters are in fact being laid down by hand, and the consistency of that is just tremendous. So those are a couple of examples of the art that was available prior to 1452 in Western Europe. So along comes Gutenberg and makes possible printed books. We're still looking then at a years-long process to actually set up the press. It took about 2 to 3 years to actually typeset the Gutenberg Bible, but once that was done, it was possible to make effectively unlimited copies. Interestingly enough, Gutenberg was actually limited by the supply of paper. Paper was expensive and difficult to come by, and he needed a particular kind of paper that would take up the ink that came off the press without running too badly and without showing through and some other things like that. But it's pretty clear that once we move to Gutenberg, what we're dealing with at this point is a craft rather than an art. This is an example of a Gutenberg Bible. And you can see that it has become very regimented, very kind of predictable. There are some unique pieces in here. Anything that's on the page that's done in color was not done by the printing press. So the printing press itself laid down those 42 lines in 2 columns on each page. But the red and the blue that you see and the label up at the top, which if you look closely you may be able to read, it's G-E-N-E on one side and S-I-S on the other side. So this is from the Book of Genesis. Interestingly enough, page numbers did not come along as a convention until quite a bit later. So the Gutenberg Bible is printed here and somewhat hand decorated. It's, compared to the manuscripts we were just looking at, it's really not very interesting. It's not ugly, but it's not spectacular either. It's more of a craft piece than a piece of art. Now, interestingly enough, the Gutenberg Bibles were commissioned for specific buyers. So when they sold them, they were to go to a specific person, and that specific person would have commissioned the decorations, such as the ones that